In this episode, we talk about a legal case that raises questions about women's access to surrogacy. We also talk about the fire breakout at Kolkata hotel, which claimed 14 lives. But first, we talk about the terrorists who carried out the Pahalgam terror attack and the challenges that security forces are facing in trying to nip them. Hi, I'm Ichha Sharma, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. More than 9 days after the Pahalgam terror attack, security forces are still searching for those responsible. The attackers are believed to be hiding in the dense forests of South Kashmir, where the terrain and poor visibility continue to hamper operations. Meanwhile, in response, the authorities have imposed strict security measures across the region, including the closure of nearly 50 tourist spots earlier this week. To understand the challenges being faced by the forces and what we've learned so far about the attackers, my colleague Shashank Bhargava speaks with the Indian Express's Deeptiman Tiwary in the segment.
Deeptiman, it has now been over a week since the Pahalgam attack took place. Talk about the challenges that the security forces are facing in trying to catch those responsible.
So let's understand that where this attack took place, the Baisaran Meadow, is surrounded by thick jungles of, South Kashmir. So it has been a challenge to actually corner these terrorists who actually, after killing the 25 tourists in the Baisaran Meadow on April 22, disappeared in these jungles. And security forces have since engaged them in cordon search operations. And it's not an easy job because in these jungles, the visibility can be less than 100 meters. And, you can sight somebody a second and the next second they will disappear and you'll not be able to find them. Also, just blindly going into the jungle can be counterproductive because, there is a person who is already inside the jungle and you are chasing the person from below. And that person is in an advantageous position and is probably looking at you. So you could end up losing lives on your side. That is again something that you wouldn't want to do. They have been able to locate them 4 or 5 times now. And in one instance, at least, there has been an exchange of fire where they were visibly located. And there was an exchange of fire between the militants and security forces. Thankfully, at the moment, what we know is they continue to be confined to the jungles of South Kashmir range. And so there is a greater chance of either apprehending them or neutralizing them.
And Deeptiman, this area, this jungle, can it be used to cross over to the other side?
Oh, yes. If they can cross the Kishtwar range, and interestingly, this year the snow has been less, so it is easier to cross the Kishtwar range. If they can cross the Kishtwar range, they will enter the Jammu division, and from there they can reach the Jammu border through the jungles and can cross over. But yes, at the same time, both international border and LOC have been completely sealed because this is something that security forces are already expecting that the terrorists will attempt to go back to Pakistan. So they have to be cornered here. So this entire counter-infiltration grid has been bolstered up. Everybody is on high alert. So the idea is that to not let them cross the border and to keep them cornered. And they've been thankfully been successful in keeping them cornered in the South Kashmir range. And the hope obviously is that sooner than later they will be neutralized. So the security forces are taking every information very, very seriously.
Also, Deeptiman, we are talking about neutralizing them, but I'm guessing it will be better if these people are caught alive, right? Because that way you can get some information out of them. But is that something that's not likely?
Look, it is very unlikely that these terrorists are going to be caught alive because they are highly motivated, trained terrorists. If at all they are going to be sighted or cornered, they are going to put up a fight. And generally, it's very difficult. It hasn't been seen earlier that, people get arrested. Generally, it's the local militants who generally get arrested. Most of these foreign militants, they sort of come on a fidain mission that, if you can come back, fine. If you can't come back, you have to die there. So they come prepared to die. And that is why they're very, very dangerous. But you're right. If any one of them is caught alive, it will be a huge boost to our investigations and also to put Pakistan in the dock in front of the international community, because let's remember, Pakistan has been denying its involvement in the attacks. In fact, it has forced the resistance force to even take back its claim because it suddenly realized that, this will link Pakistan to the attacks. So it is in denial mode. And if we get hold of one of the terrorists who perpetrated this attack, we will be able to produce undeniable evidence of Pakistan's involvement and its establishments, its military's involvement in this entire affair, and corner Pakistan internationally into taking some concrete step to dismantle these terror infrastructure in their own country. That's what we did in 26/11. Let's remember the results of 26/11 investigations would have been very different if Kasab had not been caught alive.
And Deeptiman, now that it has been over a week and investigations have been ongoing, talk about what we have learned so far about how this attack was carried out and the planning that went into it.
So what we understand as of now, the J&K police has identified 3 terrorists till now. It is suspected that not more than 4 are involved, but the identity of the 4th is not yet confirmed. The 3 terrorists who have been identified, 2 of them are from Pakistan. One is identified as Ali Bhai, alias Talha, Pakistani. The other is Hashim Musa, alias Suleiman, who is also a Pakistani. And the third is Adil Thokar, who is a local terrorist, elite recruit from Bijbehra in Anantnag. And what we understand is that these terrorists have infiltrated through the Samba and Kathua region in Jammu by cutting through the fence and entering Jammu and Kashmir about 1.5 years back. And since then, they have been involved in quite a few terror attacks, which includes some in the Poonch Rajouri region, another in Bhutapathri, which is near Gulmarg. And more importantly, they were involved in the Z-Mode tunnel attack again in October last year, where 7 employees of a company which was involved in making that tunnel in Sonmarg area were targeted by terrorists and killed. Both Hashim Musa and Ali Bhai are suspected to be highly trained. They have military grade training. They do precision firing, operate with great stealth in the jungles, and can live off the jungles. That is, they do not come in contact with local villagers. So it is not easy to nab them. They also do not talk over the phone. So interception of, general calls is going to be difficult, and locating them is not going to be easy. But still, there is a coordinated search operation going on, and sooner or later, these guys are going to be either arrested or killed.
And Deeptiman, besides Hashim Musa and Ali Bhai, you also spoke about the third person who was identified and who in fact was a local. This was Adil Thokar. Tell us, what do we know about him?
So Adil Thokar, what we know of, he has a very interesting story. He is from Bijbehra, comes from a half-decent family, has done his schooling and college from Anantnag, and then actually became a teacher in Anantnag, and he used to teach in a school. And then somehow, probably locally, he got radicalized. We don't know how he got radicalized, but after that, what he did was he traveled to Pakistan using the legal route. So on a valid visa, he traveled to Pakistan on a student visa to go there and study and appear for some exam there. And then this was in 2018, and from there on, he went on to join an elite training camp. And then only recently, towards the end of 2023 or 2024, he's suspected to have entered India again. So he has been a local guide for the terrorists and also their accomplice. It is also suspected that it is Thokar who may have identified Baisaran as the best place to attack, because it would be difficult for security forces to respond to the attack immediately, because Baisaran Meadow is not connected by a road, and it takes at least 40 minutes for an able-bodied, fit person to walk up the hill. So that is why they took their time and killed all the tourists at leisure.
Right, and we understand that these 3 people were identified after eyewitnesses were shown photos of known terrorists. And that's how they first got Hashim Musa. But talk about the other details we have now come to know through eyewitnesses.
See, Baisaran Meadow is a huge meadow, and these terrorists entered from 2 different directions. And on both sides, towards the jungle, the fence is cut a little bit, and there are stairs. So you can sort of go into the forest for a walk and then come back through that into the meadow. In fact, one of the reasons that so many killings took place, because it's actually the entire Baisaran Meadow is fenced, and there are only those 2 cuts from which the terrorists entered, and then there is a small gate. So it actually, in a sense, it became a Jallianwala Bagh. People had nowhere to go. And at any given point in Baisaran Meadow, there are 2,000 people. So what happened was that whatever we spoke to the eyewitnesses and we gathered, we understand that when the first fire started coming, even the locals didn't realize that this was a terror attack. And people thought that maybe, somebody is busting crackers or whatever, because at the back of their mind, there is never this thing that tourists will get attacked by terrorists. So, like one of the eyewitnesses told us that he first thought that this was crackers. So he didn't give much thought to it. But then about 5 minutes later, he saw a body falling. And then he realized that, this could be a terror attack. And so whatever guests were there with him, he immediately, thankfully, he was near that, fence opening at one end, and he immediately took his guests out and took them down from the jungle, and so sort of saved their life.
Yeah, and there was also this one person who climbed up a tree and hid there, right? Anything that he has revealed?
Yes, actually, this local who climbed up a tree is the key witness in the entire case, because see, initially what happened was that because everybody saw only a part of the attack, nobody is standing there to document the attack. Everyone is there to save their lives. So everyone saw a part of the attack. So somebody said there were 3, somebody said there were 5, somebody said there were 7. Those kind of stories came from eyewitness accounts. And there were these videos which were also in patches. So somebody is, making video in one corner, somebody is making video in another corner. So putting all of that together took a lot of time. And it was giving varying figures of how many terrorists may be involved. But there was this guy who, out of fear, who is a local photographer who clicks pictures of tourists, he climbed a tree and was over that tree for more than 2 hours. In fact, he wouldn't come down when security forces came because he was so scared that he said, I'm going to live in this tree now. But somehow the security forces brought him down, and he became the key witness because he was the only person who had a bird's eye view of the whole attack. And it is through his testimony that it has been confirmed that probably there were not more than 4 attackers. He has also done a recording of the whole thing. So his testimony is very, very important. Yes.
And Deeptiman, talk about the measures that are currently in place in Kashmir, because we understand that a lot of tourist spots, for example, have now been completely shut.
So on Tuesday, the government shut down as many as 49 tourist destinations in Kashmir. Let's remember that in the past few years, especially after COVID, and post August 5, 2019 decisions, government has been pushing tourism in Jammu and Kashmir in a big way. 75 new destinations have been opened for tourist visits. So earlier, tourists would be limited to going to say Srinagar, Gulmarg, Sonmarg and Pahalgam, and your tourism would be sort of over. Now all kinds of places have been opened, like the Gurez Valley has been opened, which is right on the border with Pakistan. People now go to Keren sector in Kupwara, which used to be in the news only for military operations and infiltration of terrorists. So there was a huge push from the government to open tourism in Jammu and Kashmir, and that is why we were seeing record footfalls, more than 2 crore people flowing into Kashmir every season. This was obviously done with an assumption, and now in hindsight we can say this was a very costly assumption, that tourists will not be attacked. So for example, even in the Baisaran meadow, if there were just 4 CRPF personnel, it would have been difficult for terrorists, 1, to target, 2, even if they did, the toll wouldn't have been so high. Probably they would have not been able to manage more than 5 to 6 kills before the forces would begin to retaliate, and then they would have to fight the forces. And there is a CRPF battalion right at the base from where the trek to Baisaran starts. And yet somewhere in the administration's mind, it was there that, too much security presence is a deterrence to leisure activities. So they should be left open. There have been instances where police have, flagged that, these areas where tourism is happening has frequent terrorist movement, and they have stopped tourism in those places. But again, the administration has pushed that, no, don't do this. This will impact the local economy. So please allow tourists to go. So then those things have been opened. So somewhere, the administration shut its eyes, thinking that, tourists are not going to be targeted, and so this should be allowed. And this, so to say, in hindsight, when we say this is a lapse, this gap was exploited by terrorists, and, we lost 26 innocent lives, 25 were tourists.
And Deeptiman, are people still visiting Kashmir? Are tourists still going there?
So, see, much of Pahalgam has almost emptied out. So has Srinagar. But what we saw in the first week or so after the attack, there was some resilient tourism. there were people who were still going. There were people, who had this idea that abhi ek attack ho gaya, dusra nahi hoga. Now the security must be tightened, so let's go. Now these were people who had already made their bookings and they were thinking that, why cancel the bookings? If there is enough security, let's go now. A holiday is planned. Two, there was tremendous assurance provided by the locals that you please come, don't fear, we are there, we will protect you. So, those assurances also gave them some strength. Two, there were certain, we saw very, very strong-headed tourists who told us that not coming to Kashmir was not a question because this is what terrorists want and we should not let them win. So those kind of tourists, but largely anywhere between 70 to 80% cancellations post the attack, and hotels are largely empty. Taxi stands are full, pony stands are full because nobody is taking them. So yes, despite this resilient tourism has been badly affected, and whatever little was left is going to end because now those 49 destinations have also been shut down. So now you can only go to Dal Lake, Gulmarg, Sonmarg, and to the Pahalgam town. That's it. So it is unlikely that more tourists will flow into Srinagar anymore.
And on Tuesday, the Prime Minister had chaired a meeting with the top military leadership to discuss this entire situation. Do we know what all was discussed there?
So obviously these meetings are very closed door and not many details are shared with us. But what we know is that the Prime Minister has expressed full confidence in our armed forces and given them a free hand to deal with this attack. What we also know is that he has expressed that we have to use all means and show a resolve in crushing terrorism. And this is a big statement, which means it gives our armed forces to strategically and tactically plan whatever action that they believe is suitable in crushing the terrorist infrastructure which is across the border. What these steps will be, obviously, is going to be a top secret affair and cannot be shared. But let's see what happens.
From the unrest in Kashmir, we now move to a legal case raising critical questions about women's access to surrogacy in India. Earlier this month, the Bombay High Court directed a 38-year-old woman to obtain the Supreme Court's permission to have a child via surrogacy. The woman had first approached the Bombay High Court in 2023. At the time, she was divorced and her 2 biological children were in the custody of her former husband.
And as per a case in 2012, she had undergone a complicated surgery for which her uterus was removed and she could not bear the child after that.
This is the Indian Express's Omkar Gokhale, who reported on the story for the newspaper.
So after the couple got divorced in 2017, according to her petition, she claimed that she did not have any access to the 2 children and the mother-child relation, so to speak, ceased to exist between them. And then she desired to become a mother again. She consulted her doctor and tried to see if she could have child through maybe assisted reproductive techniques. And then the private doctor suggested her to undergo surrogacy. And doctor also suggested that, she was also capable of using her own eggs for the surrogacy. So the doctor recommended that surrogacy. And then the woman also in her petition says that being a single working woman, she could maintain herself and she was not remarried as well. So that was more the reason to become eligible for surrogacy.
But Omkar says that her request for surrogacy was rejected by the local medical authority. And this is because the authorities said that under the Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021, a woman can opt for surrogacy only if she has no surviving child, whether biological, adopted, or born through surrogacy. And so this is what led the woman to approach the Bombay High Court, which, as we mentioned, directed her to seek permission from the Supreme Court instead. To discuss this case and to understand the contemporary surrogacy laws in India, we speak to Omkar in this segment. Omkar, this isn't the first time India's surrogacy laws have made headlines, but this case seems to be a bit different. So can you tell us what's making it such a talking point now?
So, in the High Court order, the bench has said that the Supreme Court is already seized of the larger issue of whether single unmarried women can undergo surrogacy. However, the present case is kind of an interesting case where a question has been raised that whether a divorced woman who has 2 healthy biological children from the previous marriage, which is dissolved now, with whom she does not have any contact anymore, whether she can undergo surrogacy. I mean, she's not merely a single woman, but she also had biological children from the previous marriage who are still surviving. If the petitioner approaches Supreme Court with an intervention petition to consider the issue, the High Court said that, Supreme Court may delve into that issue, which is already seized of lots of matters which concern the larger issue. And then once the Supreme Court takes a view on this woman's petition, there could be a binding law. I mean, that's what the High Court had suggested her. So this case is, in that sense, kind of an interesting case, which deals with a different aspect of single unmarried woman seeking a surrogacy.
Right, and you note that the woman had undergone a hysterectomy, is divorced, and doesn't have custody of her children, and yet she was denied permission to pursue surrogacy. So can you break down for us the legal basis on which her request was rejected?
Yeah, so this Surrogacy Act, it provides that there will be a district medical board consisting of civil surgeon of the local district hospital, which will scrutinize whether the surrogacy of a particular person or a couple can be permitted or not. And after examining this petitioner's case, the civil surgeon of the concerned district rejected her petition. The civil surgeon said that the specific provision which Surrogacy Act has, which is provided in the Section 4 of the Surrogacy Act, it talks about this regulation of surrogacy and allied procedures, and primarily it has laid down that intending couple or a woman can avail surrogacy only in case there is no surviving biological or adopted child, or even a child born through surrogacy. But in this woman's case, she had the surviving child from the previous marriage.
Right, so Omkar, even if a woman has children she hasn't seen or raised in years, she still is considered ineligible. That's the crux here, right?
Yeah. The civil surgeon clarified that the exception could have been made only in case the surviving child was maybe suffering from the life-threatening diseases, the fatal diseases, or if the child was certified as physically or mentally challenged. But again, in the present case, the petitioner's two children from the previous marriage, they were, quite healthy. So the hospital again went to clarify that the fact that the woman did not have custody or whether she did not remarry or not, it would not help her to seek an exception under this law. And as a result, the authority said the presence of surviving children was the most important issue to decide her case for surrogacy, and not her fertility status, which she said that she had the fertile eggs to undergo surrogacy.
And as you mentioned, despite acknowledging her pain and her intent, the Bombay High Court refused interim relief and, instead told her to approach the Supreme Court, which is already looking at broader questions in this case. So can you break down for us what the major concerns SC is raising and why do they matter for so many women?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court verdict, I would say that it will have a far-reaching impact on the law of surrogacy, and it would impact several women such as this petitioner who intend to avail the measure but could not do so for some restrictions which are prescribed in the law. This High Court bench, which was led by Justice Girish Kulkarni, was going to pass an interim order on the petitioner's plea earlier. But it was informed by one of the lawyers that there was a pending matter in the Supreme Court where the larger issues of rights of unmarried and single women to get the child by surrogacy were yet to be ascertained. Then the High Court referred to that Supreme Court proceedings. So when the matters had come up before the Supreme Court in 2023, which the High Court cited, the senior judge on the bench, Justice B.V. Nagaratna, she had raised a few questions as to whether single woman having a child was an exception to the Indian society, and if it is accepted by the Indian society. And the Supreme Court is yet to decide this issue. So once it decides the issue, it will have a long impact, the far-reaching impact, or maybe the cascading effect on the law, how it pans out.
And another concern that has been raised by the courts is regarding the commercialization of surrogacy, if the law isn't strictly interpreted. So can you talk about that aspect a bit?
So as per the surrogacy law, the commercialization, it involves services or procedures, let's say including selling or buying of human embryo or services of surrogate motherhood by way of paying the surrogate mother or giving any reward beyond the medical expenses are mentioned, and the law prohibits such practice. Therefore, the High Court raised the concern that whether allowing the petition, which is filed by this present petitioner, would lead to such commercialization. Even if the petitioner's case would have been genuine, still it would open the floodgates for some other claimants is what the High Court had apprehended. The judges raised several questions to the petitioner, such as who will be the father of the child and if allowing her petition would lead to commercialization. And it said the courts cannot merely think of the women's right, but it also has to consider the rights of the child born out of the surrogacy. So it said even though the petitioner's case, it might have some substance, but allowing it may have some repercussions, which the Supreme Court will be in a better position to consider and decide upon since it's dealing with the larger issue.
But Omkar, do you think this case exposes a gap in, how Indian law understands the idea of motherhood, especially for single, divorced or remarried women?
Yeah, so like I said, when Justice B.V. Nagaratna raised some questions about whether this surrogacy for unmarried women could be acceptable, so to speak, or whether it is part of the Indian society. So yeah, it kind of delves into the deeper gap in how the Indian law understands the motherhood, but which is also subject to the things that happen in Indian society. And once the Supreme Court takes the final view on the matter, the single and divorced women may have a clarity on whether they can avail surrogacy. And apart from that, the question of age of an intending woman is also being deliberated by Supreme Court. So whether there has to be some tinkering on terms of the age group in which the woman can avail the surrogacy, that will also be considered by the Supreme Court in the end.
And lastly, speaking of the case specifically, what happens next for the woman in this case? Like, what lies ahead?
So the Bombay High Court has suggested that she should approach the Supreme Court to get more clarity on opinion, or maybe the opinion of the top court, or wait till the Supreme Court finally decides the issue. So the option is hers. And then once the Supreme Court decides, if she waits for the Supreme Court's verdict instead of intervening into the matter before it, once the Supreme Court decides it, then the High Court can consider whether to grant her relief based on the law which the Supreme Court will lay down in future. Once the Supreme Court decides on the broader issue, which will be binding on all High Courts and authorities concerned, it may or may not pave a new path for the several women such as petitioner. So it'll be quite interesting to see how the Supreme Court deals with the issue in the end, and it might decide the fate of lots of such women who intend to undergo surrogacy.
And in the end, we talk about a fire that broke out in one of Kolkata's oldest areas that claimed 14 lives. On Tuesday evening, a fire broke out at the Rituraj Hotel in the Madan Mohan Street area of Bhargava, one of Kolkata's oldest and most densely populated commercial districts. The blaze, which began around 7:30 p.m., killed at least 14 people, including 2 children, and left several others injured. The Indian Express's Ravik Bhattacharya and Tanushri Bose reported that the incident has prompted the formation of a special investigation team to probe the cause of the fire, assess the legality of the building's structural layout, and examine the evacuation challenges faced by the guests. The Rituraj Hotel is a 6-story structure with commercial godowns on the ground floor and guest accommodations above. As per local accounts, it is not uncommon in Bhargava for hotels to operate above wholesale trading spaces, especially in buildings that were not originally designed to host lodging services. According to Kolkata Police Commissioner Manoj Kumar Verma, most of the victims died due to suffocation, while one person died after falling from the building while trying to escape the flames. Rescue teams found 13 bodies on the upper floors after the fire was brought under control in the early hours of Wednesday. Now, after the fire broke out, it rapidly engulfed the upper floors. Within minutes, 10 fire engines were dispatched to the site. Guests trapped inside were seen waving from windows and standing on narrow parapets to avoid the smoke. Some tried to reach the rooftop for safety. According to witnesses, mobile phone flashlights were used to signal for help. Despite the quick arrival of rescue personnel, the narrow lanes and congested surroundings made access difficult. Firefighters had to deploy hydraulic ladders to reach those stranded on upper floors. Loudspeakers were used to calm and communicate with trapped individuals while the fire was being contained. It took more than 5 hours for the fire to be fully doused. Only then could emergency teams enter the charred upper floors and begin recovering bodies and identifying those who had succumbed to the smoke. Now, many of the hotel guests were traders and workers from other states who had come to Kolkata for commercial activity in Bara Bazaar's wholesale markets. One of the deceased, Sanjoy Paswan, was declared dead on arrival at Kolkata Medical College Hospital after he fell from a height while attempting to escape. Others who were rescued remain under medical care, with some suffering from severe inhalation injuries and burns. The identities of the deceased are being confirmed and efforts are underway to notify their families, many of whom are based in other parts of India. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank Bhargava and me, Ichha Sharma. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.